Don't throw away your eggshells and coffee grounds anymore, because today I am going to show you how these two simple kitchen leftovers can completely transform the way your tomato plants grow. Most people think that a poor tomato harvest happens because of bad seeds or bad luck, but the real reason is almost always the same thing, and that is how the soil is prepared and fed from the very first day. If your tomato plants are always thin, pale, slow to flower, or drop their fruit before it ripens, the problem is not the plant itself, it is what is happening under the soil, where you cannot see it. Today I will show you a complete natural system using only eggshells and coffee grounds that will help your tomato plants build strong roots, thick stems, dark green leaves, and heavy clusters of fruit, all without spending a single extra rupee on chemical fertilizer. Let's start by understanding why these two ingredients work so well together. Eggshells are almost entirely made of calcium carbonate, and calcium is one of the most important building blocks for a tomato plant. Calcium strengthens the cell walls of the plant, which means stronger stems, sturdier branches, and fruit that resists cracking and rotting from the inside. Coffee grounds, on the other hand, are rich in nitrogen and organic matter, which feeds the beneficial microorganisms living in your soil. These microorganisms are the real workers here. They break down organic material and turn it into food the plant can actually absorb. When you combine calcium from eggshells with nitrogen and organic matter from coffee grounds, you create a balanced, slow-release feeding system that mimics exactly what a tomato plant would find in a rich forest floor. This is not a trick or a shortcut. This is simply giving the plant what it has always needed, just in a form that is easy to prepare using things you already have in your kitchen. Now let's begin with the eggshells, because how you prepare them makes a huge difference in how well they work. Save about 4 to 5 eggshells, and instead of throwing them in the bin after cooking, rinse them lightly under water to remove any egg white residue, and then let them air dry for a day or two, or you can dry them in a warm oven for a few minutes if you are in a hurry. Once they are completely dry, place them in a blender or a spice grinder and grind them into a very fine powder, almost like flour. This step is extremely important, and it is the step that most people skip or do carelessly. If you leave the eggshells in large chunks, they can take many months, sometimes even more than a year, to break down in the soil, and by the time they release their calcium, your plant may have already suffered from a deficiency. But when the eggshells are ground into a fine powder, the surface area exposed to moisture and soil bacteria increases dramatically, which means the calcium becomes available to the roots much faster, often within just a few weeks instead of many months. Store this eggshell powder in a small dry jar, and you will use it at several different stages of the growing process, so it is worth preparing a good amount at once. Next, let's talk about the coffee grounds. You can use fresh coffee grounds or the used grounds left over after you brew your coffee. Both work well, but make sure they are not moldy and have not been sitting wet for too long, because that can introduce fungal problems instead of benefits. Spread the used coffee grounds out on a plate or a tray and let them dry out completely for a day. This prevents clumping and also prevents any unwanted mold growth when you store them. Once dry, keep them in a separate container, because we are going to use coffee grounds in 2 different ways during this process. First, as a dry layer mixed into the soil, and later as a brewed liquid solution that we will feed to the plant through watering. Now that our 2 main ingredients are ready, let's prepare the planting hole properly, because even the best natural fertilizer will not help if the plant is sitting in poor, compacted soil. Dig a hole about 25 to 30 centimeters deep, which is slightly deeper than what most people usually dig, and make sure the soil around the hole is loose, crumbly, and free of large clumps or stones. This depth matters because tomato roots are naturally deep feeders, and giving them extra room to grow downward means they can access more water and nutrients even during hot, dry days, when the topsoil dries out quickly. Loose, well-aerated soil is just as important as the nutrients you add, because roots need oxygen just as much as they need calcium and nitrogen. If the soil is compacted, the roots will suffocate and struggle no matter how much fertilizer you add on top, so take a few extra minutes to break up any hard clumps and mix in a bit of compost or old potting soil if your garden soil is heavy clay. Once the hole is ready, it is time to build what I call the nutrient base layer. And this is the real secret behind this entire method. Sprinkle about 2 full tablespoons of the finely ground eggshell powder across the bottom of the hole, spreading it evenly so it is not just piled in one spot. On top of that, add about 2 tablespoons of the dried coffee grounds, spreading them in the same way. Now cover this layer with a thin covering of soil, about 2 to 3 centimeters, so that the roots of the plant will not sit directly on top of the raw eggshell and coffee grounds, but will instead grow down into them gradually over the coming weeks. This layering is important because it means the plant is not overwhelmed with a strong concentration of nutrients right at the root tips on day 1. Instead, it creates a slow, steady release that the plant can draw from as it grows and as its root system expands deeper into the hole. Lightly water this layer before placing the plant, just enough to dampen the soil and begin activating the natural decomposition process. This wakes up the soil bacteria and starts the breakdown of the coffee grounds and the fine eggshell powder right from the very beginning. Now, gently take your tomato seedling and place it in the center of the hole, right on top of the thin soil covering over the nutrient layer. Try to keep the root ball intact as much as possible. Tomato roots are delicate at this stage, and any unnecessary damage can slow down how quickly the plant adapts to its new home. Hold the plant upright and begin filling in soil around the base, pressing gently after each layer to remove large air pockets, but do not pack the soil down tightly. This is another point where people often make a mistake. They press the soil so firmly that it becomes almost like concrete around the roots, and this blocks the airflow the roots need to breathe and expand. Loose soil around the root zone will always outperform tightly packed soil, even if the tightly packed soil looks neater on the surface. After planting, water the area with plain, clean water only. Do not add any coffee solution or extra fertilizer at this point. The plant's first job after transplanting is to recover from the shock of being moved and to begin establishing new root hairs in the surrounding soil. And it needs a period of calm, steady moisture, rather than a burst of nutrients that it is not yet ready to absorb. Water gently around the base every day or every other day, depending on how hot and dry your climate is, keeping the soil moist but never soggy or waterlogged. Overwatering at this early stage is just as damaging as underwatering, so check the top few centimeters of soil with your finger. If it feels dry, water again. If it still feels slightly damp, wait another day. After about 5 to 7 days, your tomato plant should have settled in and begun forming new roots into the surrounding soil. This is when we introduce the first liquid feeding using our coffee grounds. To prepare this solution, take 2 tablespoons of dried coffee grounds and mix them into 1 liter of warm water, not boiling, just comfortably warm. Stir the mixture well and then let it sit undisturbed for 12 to 24 hours. During this resting period, the warm water slowly pulls out the nitrogen and other organic compounds from the coffee grounds, and the longer it sits within that window, the more nutrient-rich and stable the solution becomes. After the resting period is complete, strain out all the solid coffee grounds using a cloth or a fine strainer, and keep only the liquid. This liquid is now your natural coffee fertilizer, ready to feed directly to the plant. For the very first feeding, it is important to dilute this coffee solution with an equal amount of clean water, essentially cutting the strength in half. Young tomato roots at this stage are still delicate and can be easily overwhelmed by a full-strength solution, so diluting it the first time allows the plant to adjust gradually without any shock to its root system. Apply about 200 to 300 milliliters of this diluted solution around the base of the plant, making sure to pour it around the surrounding soil rather than directly against the stem, because constant moisture touching the stem can encourage rot and fungal problems over time. After this first gentle introduction, future feedings with the coffee solution can be given at full strength, still using the same 200 to 300 milliliter amount per plant, applied once every 7 to 10 days. Now here is where the real magic of this method comes together, because we are not going to use only coffee grounds every single time. We are going to alternate between 2 different natural feeds to give the plant a complete and balanced nutrition cycle. In week 1, you feed the plant with the coffee ground solution we just prepared. This pushes strong vegetative growth, meaning thicker stems, more leaves, and a deeper green color across the entire plant because of the nitrogen boost. Then in week 2, instead of coffee solution, you prepare an eggshell water feed. To make this, take 3 to 4 tablespoons of your finely ground eggshell powder and mix it into 1 liter of water. Then let this mixture sit for about 24 to 48 hours, stirring it occasionally so the calcium has time to dissolve slowly into the water. Strain this if you like a clearer liquid, though some people prefer to pour the whole mixture, including the fine sediment, directly around the base of the plant. Either way works. The sediment will simply continue breaking down slowly in the soil. This eggshell water feed supplies a strong dose of calcium exactly when the plant needs it most, which is during flower formation and fruit development, because calcium is directly responsible for preventing common problems like blossom end rot, which is that ugly dark sunken patch that sometimes appears on the bottom of tomatoes. So the full cycle looks like this. Week 1 is coffee ground solution for green growth. Week 2 is eggshell water for structural strength and fruit quality, and then the cycle repeats continuously throughout the entire growing season. Week 3 back to coffee, week 4 back to eggshell water, and so on. This alternating rhythm ensures the plant never becomes deficient in one nutrient while overloaded in another, which is a very common mistake when people only use one single fertilizer over and over again without variation. As the weeks go on and your tomato plant starts entering its flowering stage, you will notice the difference this method makes almost immediately. The stems will feel firmer and thicker when you gently touch them. The leaves will take on a deeper, richer green color instead of the pale yellowish green you often see in nutrient-starved plants. And flowering will begin earlier and more abundantly across multiple branches at the same time rather than just a few scattered blooms. This is because the plant is not struggling to survive, it is thriving. And a thriving plant naturally puts more energy into reproduction, which for a tomato plant means flowers and eventually fruit. Once you start seeing flowers appear, this is a good time to add one small extra step to your routine, and that is a light sprinkle of dry eggshell powder directly around the base of the plant. Just a teaspoon or two, worked gently into the top layer of soil without disturbing the roots. This acts as a slow, steady top-up of calcium right at the surface, which becomes especially useful as the plant begins setting fruit and demanding even more calcium than it did during the earlier vegetative stage. Continue your alternating watering cycle of coffee solution 1 week and eggshell water the next week, all the way through flowering and into fruit development. As the small green fruits begin to form and swell, continue this same routine without changing anything. Resist the temptation to add extra fertilizer or increase the dosage, because tomato plants actually respond better to consistency than to sudden bursts of extra feeding. A steady, predictable supply of nutrients allows the plant to grow at a natural, healthy pace, producing fruit that develops properly instead of growing too fast and cracking or splitting from uneven water and nutrient uptake. If you notice the lower leaves of the plant turning slightly yellow as the season progresses, this is often completely normal. It simply means the plant is redirecting its energy and older nutrients toward the fruit, which is exactly what you want to see happening. One thing I want to mention here, because many people ask about this, is what to do if you are growing tomatoes in containers or pots rather than directly in garden soil. The same method works perfectly well in containers. You simply follow the exact same steps, layering the eggshell powder and coffee grounds at the bottom of the planting hole within the pot, and continuing the same alternating liquid feeding schedule every week. The only difference is that container soil tends to dry out faster than garden soil, so you may need to check the moisture level a little more frequently, especially during hot summer days, but the feeding schedule itself does not need to change. Another common question is about mulching, and while it is not strictly part of this eggshell and coffee ground method, adding a light layer of dried leaves, straw, or even used coffee grounds as a top mulch around the base of the plant can help retain soil moisture between waterings, and also continues to slowly add organic matter to the soil as it breaks down over time. If you choose to do this, just make sure the mulch layer is not piled directly against the stem itself. Leave a small gap of a few centimeters around the stem to prevent moisture buildup and potential stem rot. Many people also ask whether this method can help prevent pests, And while eggshells and coffee grounds are not a pesticide, healthier plants with strong cell walls and robust growth are naturally more resistant to certain pests and diseases simply because they are not weak or stressed. Some gardeners also believe that a light sprinkle of dry, sharp eggshell fragments around the base of the plant can discourage soft-bodied pests like slugs and snails from crossing over to reach the stem, since the sharp edges are uncomfortable for them to crawl across. This is a nice additional bonus, but the main benefit of this method remains the steady, balanced nutrition it provides throughout the entire life of the plant. If at any point during this process you notice your tomato plant is not responding as expected, perhaps the leaves are curling or growth seems slower than usual, take a moment to check the basics first. Make sure the plant is getting at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight each day, because no amount of eggshell or coffee ground feeding can compensate for insufficient light. Tomatoes are sun-loving plants, and they simply cannot thrive in heavy shade. Also, double-check your watering consistency. Inconsistent watering, meaning long dry periods followed by sudden heavy watering, is one of the most common reasons for problems like blossom end rot and fruit cracking, even when calcium levels in the soil are perfectly adequate. Consistency in both light and water will allow the nutrients from this eggshell and coffee ground system to actually do their job properly. As harvest time approaches, you will begin to see the true results of this entire process: tomatoes that are firm, well-formed, deeply colored, and largely free from the cracking and rotting problems that so commonly frustrate home gardeners. The plants themselves will typically appear noticeably bushier and healthier compared to plants grown without this kind of feeding routine, with branches strong enough to support heavy clusters of fruit without needing excessive staking or support. Continue the alternating feeding cycle right up until the final fruits have been harvested, and if you plan on growing tomatoes again in the same location or in the same containers next season, you can even work a fresh layer of eggshell powder and coffee grounds into the soil at the end of the season, allowing it to break down slowly over the winter months and enrich the soil in preparation for your next planting. What I love most about this method is how simple and accessible it truly is. There is no need for expensive fertilizers, no complicated schedules to memorize, and no special equipment beyond a blender and a jar or two for storage. Every single ingredient comes from things most households are already throwing away every single day: eggshells from breakfast, coffee grounds from your morning cup, and yet when combined and applied with just a little bit of patience and consistency, they create a complete, natural nutrition system capable of transforming weak, struggling tomato plants into strong, productive, and genuinely abundant ones. So the next time you crack an egg for breakfast or brew a fresh pot of coffee, remember that you are not just making a meal, you are also creating the foundation for your next great tomato harvest. Save those shells, save those grounds, and give this method a real try from the very beginning of your next planting season. If you follow each step carefully, from grinding the eggshells finely, to properly preparing the nutrient base layer, to sticking with that steady weekly alternating feeding cycle, you will start to see the difference within just a few short weeks: stronger stems, darker leaves, earlier flowers, and eventually a heavy, healthy harvest of ripe, delicious tomatoes. If you try this method in your own garden, I would genuinely love to hear how it goes for you, so feel free to share your results and your experience in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way to the end, and I wish you tremendous success in applying this simple, natural, and completely free method. Here is to strong roots, healthy plants, and a truly abundant tomato harvest this